Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel geopolitical video. You might recall how in October, the UK agreed to give up sovereignty of its Chagos Islands to Mauritius. This was a very big deal because it represents the end of one of the last 14 British overseas territories, the last vestiges of the empire that never became fully self-governing, and indeed the furthest east of all of them. This was a move which was praised by some in the UK, but also criticised by others because it was giving away territory, but weirdly enough, the deal does look to be dead, and it looks like it's not the UK's fault. The people who are against this, weirdly enough, are the new Mauritian government, who seem to have serious reservations about this deal, but also the United States seems as though they are very hostile towards this. This is a very weird situation to be in, because it's not just the US and the country, it's also the people who previously lived on those islands. So how is it that the UK made a deal to practically just give up sovereignty of some territory, to give it away to a third country, and that country seems to be upset about the deal? Well, let's dive into it today, because it does seem to spell the unraveling of the deal to give away one of the UK's overseas territories. So first things first, let's talk about the fact that the new Mauritian Prime Minister has fairly simple, objectives here. There was just a general election in that country, and he won by a huge landslide. And how do you win an election in a country? The broadest, easiest way is you say nationalism. You put your country first, you say other countries are treating you poorly, and that you'll do a good job in making that work. That sounds like sarcasm, but look into two of the three biggest issues, and one of them was a Japanese-controlled bulk carrier crashing into a coral reef and causing an oil spill with a bunch of damage, and basically people believe that there was a perceived failure to hold foreign actors accountable, and so there were big protests, and those protests were seemingly in favor of anyone but the government. But the second issue was the Chagos Archipelago Agreement. This should have been a big win for the previous government, but instead the other guy being like, oh yeah, they did a good job here, but not elsewhere, he goes, no. This was negotiated by the old party, and therefore it's not a great deal. He does make one good point, which is that, well, obviously, this was a deal to hand over the 8 Chagos Islands to the country, but one of those islands would have to be leased back out, because the UK currently leases that land to the United States, at least in part, and so obviously they need to lease the land back from, but they were willing to give the full sovereignty of it, they just wanted to be the tenant in effect, so that they could continue to tenant out the land. And the Prime Minister says, well, it looks as though there are some issues with this, and although the only real, I guess the only real substance is, he says that, yeah, there is a 200-year lease, even though that's not what was publicized, and he says that the tenant has become the owner, which is, sort of true. If they are going to be a 200-year tenant or 99-year tenant, then they sort of still get to control one of the biggest pieces of territory. They're going to be paying rent for it, but still, we don't control it, they do, is a very valid point. But otherwise, all he makes a point is that, yeah, I think I need more time to study the details. I know this deal is bad, but I don't fully understand how, and I'm upset at the old government for signing this deal without me. So honestly, that is a fair enough stance, and in normal times you would just eventually re-sign an agreement with some slightly changed words here or there, and then you, as the new Prime Minister, would get to claim this as your deal, and you would feel very good about that, except for the fact that there has been a new president elected in the meantime. And to be fair, this has only been heard secondhand. It's not like he's been tweeting it like his other ambitions around the world, but the Trump it does seem very likely that an America First president, so by the way, the quote here comes from Nigel Farage, leader of the third largest party by vote share in the UK, and basically as maybe the most friendly to the US administration, you might say, party, but basically he says that, yeah, there's going to be outright hostility towards this, and this makes sense. An America First president is going to prefer a deal with the UK directly than a deal with a country which, first of all, has a changing government a lot, and also a deal with it's just another party to add to negotiations. It's not a good sign when you have to give away territory, so if the US could force the UK not to do that, they would probably be under some pressure to do so. Because, yeah, if you actually look at the Chagos Islands, or rather, if we look at Diego Garcia, you can see it's the main island from the batch. When you go to British Indian Ocean Territory, it's this one right here, and there's even a United Seamen Service Club Center for US personnel. There is a giant military base here, and it's one of the most strategic for the US. If the US were to lose this, it would be a very big deal. In fact, that's the reason why the UK went through so much effort to get it. In 1960, 1968, the UK got a secret deal with the US and they got a big discount on some nuclear missiles in exchange for leasing that atoll. So the US thought it was such a big deal that they would give us some technology they wouldn't otherwise give, and so they think it is important to hold. And what's the easiest way to hold this piece of territory? Well, it's ideally to own it directly, but if that's not politically palatable, if making this a US territory isn't great, then at least having it be in the hands of one of your closest allies. And so weirdly enough, this deal between the UK Prime Minister and Mauritius is kind of being held back by the third party who owns the island. Indeed, I imagine the UK and Mauritius could come to a deal eventually, but maybe not if someone else is involved. And indeed, also it's worth mentioning at this point that the original deal and every piece of development since then has been hugely criticized by the actual Chagosians, I guess we should say, because they are the people who are actually done poorly in this deal. If we look into it, if you look into anything about it, it'll be like, well, the UK insisted the Mauritius had no legitimate claim to the islands, and we can talk about that later, but the actual bad thing they did was forcibly remove 1,000 people from the archipelago. As you can see, looking on a map right here, this is the British Indian Ocean Territory, and let's just do some distance measuring. This is Mauritius right here, the island that you might spot in places like this. So this is Mauritius, and let's indeed show the distance. It is 2,000 kilometers away. Weirdly enough, it's not even the most logical, and the only reason that they have a claim to it is when Mauritius was a British colony, it was administered with the Chagos Islands at the same time. There had previously been all sorts of administrations with like the Maldives, a much closer British territory, and indeed, you could easily make an argument for the Seychelles if we're going by distances rules, but since we don't go by those things, we're just saying, okay, so the UN says that, that Mauritius has a great deal to claim this. A lot of countries are saying it's the last African colony, which, I mean, I feel like you're really stretching the definition of Africa and colony to make this an African colony. But anyway, people say, like, you've got to get rid of it. But there is a real struggle of like, well then, if that is true, if you've got to do all of that, under what terms should it be? Should it just be an unconditional, oh yeah, you guys should own that island, I guess, that is those islands that are 2,000 miles away? Or should it actually be considering the bad thing the British people did? Should it be saying, oh yeah, let's give up this land because it is, it used to be a part of a territory we ruled? Or should it be actually these people, like, I think the only correct stance to have if you are an anti, imperialist, if you believe that colonialism is the worst sin the UK has done, then you should say, yeah, we should fix the people who we harmed. We shouldn't say that this random government with a very nationalist leader, by the way, they have a very weird system in Mauritius. The largest party used to be the centre-left socialist movement, then the second largest party is the centre-left Social Democratic Party, and the third largest party, is it the right-wing one? Nope, it's the left-wing Socialist Party, but the fourth largest party, that's going to be the, oh no, it's the People's Organization. Okay, it seems as though Mauritius has a four-party system and they're all center-left to left. Very interesting political system, by the way. But yeah, should this random island 2,000 miles away be the beneficiaries of this terrible thing the UK did, or should the UK be making it right with the actual people? Some of those Chagos Islands people live in Mauritius, to be fair, but the claim so far hasn't been that they're going to be resettled, and indeed, they haven't been spoken to about the deal at all. I think that the deal would be ideal to make with these people directly, and I think that it's very, very wholesome when they send these people on trips out there, because there are some people that were removed from their homeland, a place that has existed for hundreds of years, and they feel like they remain powerless and voiceless in determining their future. This is the problem with, even if you try to do a really good thing to fix the bad things you did, ultimately the way you'll get the most points internationally and the way you actually fix the problem seem to be very different things, which is a bit of a bummer if you ask me. But yeah, also look, there's some people in the UK that are like that. There was more likely to put resettlement plans in place for Chagosians than in the UK. Anyway, there's a really interesting point in this whole thing about, like, yeah, it's a good deal to make at some point if you think that there is a thing that needs to be returned here. But I also would make the, if only slightly point here that, like, okay, in the UK, at least when we have this British overseas territory, we can say, oh, should we own that? We can look at any of these and say, well, outside of, like, the Cayman Islands and Gibraltar, which could probably just about govern themselves if we needed to, most of these territories are ones that want to be a part of the UK, right? The people who live there now, Argentina's not happy about the Falkland Islands, but Falkland Islanders are. The people here largely choose to be a part of the UK, should we accept their, again, the Indian Ocean Territory is a weird exception there, but should we accept their, their decisions on that and their right to live in a country where they can say we should or shouldn't be a part of the UK, or should we move them to a place where that's not okay? If we look at the criminal code, they updated it in 2021 in Mauritius, and it is now a criminal offense to misrepresent the sovereignty of Mauritius over any part of its territory. If you were to say that the Chagos Islands do not belong to Mauritius on a piece of produce, supplies, coins, stamps, official maps, or other objects, you could get a fine of up to 5 million rupees or imprisonment for 10 years. Would you like to live in a country where you can say that you are a part of this country or not? Or would you like to live in a country where that's a crime? I think that's the ultimate question you have to ask, because sometimes by doing the right thing, you're doing the really wrong thing for the people who live there. And yeah, weirdly enough, this new Prime Minister, by trying to get a better deal, might accidentally end up tanking the only deal on the table, which is the tragic thing about negotiations, right? Is sometimes you can come in thinking, well, you're already giving us stuff, so what if you gave us a little bit more? But sometimes that ends up with not getting as much as you're hoping for. Anyway, with that said, that is the current update on the British Indian Ocean Territory. I think despite the fact that everyone is claiming the deal is fully dead, I think it still will take a little while to be sure as to what will go down there. But I would also say that even when the deal was properly finalized before in October, before the government changed over, there wasn't an official handover date set. The territory is going to leave the UK at some point, but the details of how, the details of when and why, and whether they'll keep a lease and for how long that lease even goes on for, are all of the questions that have to be answered. And right now, we don't have any of the answers besides, oof, looks like the Mauritians might have overplayed their hand a bit on that one. But that's my personal take. Obviously, I kind of take this opinion of like, being from a country that looks like this, you can kind of argue like, why is it that some of these places are fine to be a UK territory? Like, oh yeah, it'd be rude to kick them out if they don't want to be kicked out. And why is it that some of these places are not fine? Is it entirely down to who makes the best sales pitch? You know, like, is the right to own territory only valid if you have the opinion of everyone around you that it's okay? Because that also feels messy to me. And also, what if, you know, I still think if we're gonna go by the rules of like, well, you've got to give it back, it clearly shouldn't belong to the British if it's all the way over there. I think we should give it to the Maldives. That's my crazy take that, you know, they're going to be losing their territory soon. They are the first country to go underwater. Maybe we should give them the Chagos Islands so they've got something to rebuild onto. Indeed, that's my high quality idea. By the way, yeah, it's interesting that all of these other islands are like basically not spoken about in this deal. It's really the major one. But yeah, there's a ton of islands out here. And so, you know, Maldivians, if you're looking for a place to settle, I'm just saying, I would help make it work. That would be something I'd like to do as a British person. And otherwise, yeah, this doesn't really affect anything besides when the sun sets on the British Empire. So that's chill, I guess. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. I do still have some videos planned about interesting things around the world. And I just got a new passport too. I got a lot of fun videos planned about travel shortly on this channel. But for now, thank you for watching. And second channel, don't care. Goodbye.